albums in this video. This album is called Private Either. Private Either. This was the second album that I released in 2022 of 3 albums. It was released on May 13th, which was Friday the 13th, which was not planned, but it proved to be cursed nonetheless. The name Private Either comes from a conversation that I had with an old coworker. I messaged her about something regarding our old boss, and I mentioned something about seeing him in public, and I followed that with, I wouldn't want to be seen with him in private either. And I just liked the way those two words were put together, which probably has not happened much, but just the way that that sounds, I like how it rolled off the tongue, and I immediately knew that I was going to use it as the title for a following album. Potentially, I would actually like to start a band separate from Toloro, but maybe using some of the music of Toloro as some songs to get the band rolling. And I would like to call it Private Either, based off of this album. Of the 3 albums that I worked on, or released in 2022, this one was definitely the one I spent the least amount of time, and probably the least amount of time that I've spent on any album of the whole Toloro discography. I started it based off of a bunch of demos that were recorded in the year 2020, along with all the majority of the material that was released between 2020 and 2022. It was all stuff I recorded back in that 7-8 month period following the pandemic and the lockdown. And a bunch of those tracks made their way onto this album. The album artwork, which you can see is also on the CD here, was developed by a guy named Lucas Ratcliffe, who specializes in artwork that conveys liminal spaces and just empty domestic man-made houses and stuff like that. I came to him with the idea of developing an album art of just a room with something in the back of the room and kind of a obscured perception of the way it looks. I wanted it to look empty and liminal, and he brought it to life. I've always admired the artwork of Lucas Ratcliffe, and I knew that I potentially wanted to have him work on the artwork for one of these albums eventually. And I actually originally commissioned him and had him finish the artwork for the early iteration of Channel Zero Forgotten Media, back when it was just referred to as VCR Live Alone. But eventually, as that album developed, I decided that I needed different album artwork to properly represent it. So to this day, it still hasn't been used, but potentially I'll use it for something. This one, however, was finished and released, and is one of my favorite records, and probably my favorite artwork of any of the albums I've released. My Instagram was hacked only about 4 or 5 days after this album came out, so I was really wasn't on any other social media at the time, so that was my entire outlet for getting the word out about music that I'd released, so it kind of flew under the radar, as if the music of Toloro was really on any radar at all. I maintain a pretty underground following. The album artwork, I actually took a chunk of this here between the wall and the floor and used to develop the back of the CD, the track list. As you can see here, made it more grainy, added text of my own. I spent less than 3 months finishing off this album, including the artwork and release and everything with it. I didn't get this one properly mastered. I did the mastering myself. But a lot of these songs really just came out kind of fluently. I didn't really put much thought into any of them. They just came about really fast. The first song, Tragic Reality, was actually written and recorded in one single day. And to this day, it's still one of my best songs, or at least one of my favorite songs. Guilt-Free Trip to Hell was inspired by a chord progression that I heard by an artist called Telepath, who sampled a song from the 80s that I've never been able to pinpoint who he actually sampled. But I liked that progression a lot, and I made my own variation of it, and that became the structure for this song, Guilt-Free Trip to Hell. And I used to play that chord progression for work all the time when I played piano. This track 3, Precious Time, was at a time where I was just really valuing all the spare time that I had to work on things that never felt particularly relevant to everything that was going on in the world. But a bunch of these songs usually start with a sample that I find that seems perfect to use, and that was a track like this. Track 4, Conjugal Visit, which is also one of my favorites that I've written, is another song that started after I was getting really into the soundtrack for a video game called Parappa the Rappa, which is a music-based game, and I used a beat from the soundtrack of that as the base of this song, and wrote the lyrics pretty quickly and wrote them kind of ironically in a way. Track 5 was one of the earliest songs that I had that I written in 2020 and was sitting around for a while and didn't really have much to it, and it overwent many name changes because I didn't really have anything specific. I had more just vocal melodies that didn't really have any lyrical meaning, but it kind of came to develop as the concept of something known as the spotlight effect, where people think to assume that they attract more attention than they actually do. Usually people with anxiety who think people take more notice of their flaws all the time, even though people mostly just think about themselves. Track 6 here, Thank God for Lisa, was written during a phase where I actually acquired Disney Plus, and I watched all 30 seasons of The Simpsons over a 10-month period. It took me a long time, and when I was growing up, I never really thought of Lisa Simpson as one of my favorites, and then as the show progressed, I felt like I could relate more and more to Lisa Simpson. And that combined with the idea of her always being the one to present sage advice and yet never seem to come across her own luck or love or ability to make friends sometimes felt relatable to me as the one who was always giving advice to a friend of mine who's always going through the rudimentary problems of relationships. Strip mall. I really just liked the word of it and kind of based a song around the sample used from Genius of Love by Tom Tom Club, which has been sampled time and time again, but the one that I usually think of that implements it best is the song Return of the Mac. And I was listening to that song a lot during the time. The song Legal in Denmark. I came up with that name simply because I liked the sound of it. It sounded kind of ironic because people associate the city of Amsterdam as being the one that has the legalization of everything, drugs and prostitutes. But I feel like some people confuse it with Denmark in a way. It's actually in the Netherlands. And at the time, I was really into this TV show we all know called To Catch a Predator. And a lot of them seem to have a false representation of what they think the law constitutes, which at the time I think properly represented the idea of legal in Denmark. Track 9 here, Before I Say Goodbye, was actually, and maybe, the first and only song that I actually wrote down. Well, actually that's not true. A song that I sat down and wrote at the piano before any other part of the process, because I usually write lyrics as an afterthought after I have some material recorded. But I wrote it about someone that I had feelings for, and by the time that I had expressed those feelings, she had already made plans to move to California. And the last song here, Unpayable Debt, was actually the last song written for this album. Was actually written in the year 2022. Might be the only one that was written in 2022. And it was kind of an afterthought because there was another song that I had planned to be on this album, but I just didn't really have it developed enough, and it didn't really fit the vibe of the rest of the songs. But at the time, I was watching the Punisher series. I was watching all of the Marvel TV shows. And there's a line where he talks about owing someone an unpayable debt. And I just like the way those words are put together. It's kind of ironic and represents a lot of what our society is going through. So that's it for track listing. Overall, a lot of these songs I think were written really well, but just weren't quite mixed properly. And if I spent more time on them, they could have been something much more commercially likable, I suppose. Have more mainstream appeal. But I develop everything with a lo-fi and hypnagogic mentality, which I think it captured really well. Not long after this, I was actually somewhat dissatisfied with the mixes of this album, and I just decided that I would go back and make a quick adjustment to a bunch of things throughout the album and release a second one called Private Either Mix 2. And I kind of steered away from it, and I kind of regret releasing it, but eventually I plan to do the same thing again as a third reflection and re-release it with the same secondary Mix 2 album artwork and call it Private Either Deluxe Version. Might include some B-sides, including that song that didn't make the cut. Maybe I might re-release it on there. But Private Either was definitely a private album. Like all of my music is developed and kept a secret until release, because that's just how I prefer to work. I think there's a certain kind of unique element that comes from music that's not touched by any outside opinion prior to its release. When I did finally release it, I came across an avant-garde movie from the 70s called Wavelength, and it's just a movie about this very deteriorated shot of a room with a window in the back that it gets progressively closer to over the course of 50 minutes, which was about the same length as this album here. And I thought it was so obscure that it would work great as just a visualizer for YouTube to have this accompany the music to. I thought those vibes went together pretty well. And ironically enough, as discreet as it was, less than 2 months later, I had a copyright warning from YouTube, and they took down the video because I guess the director or somebody who worked on the film came across it and flagged it, which was unfortunate. I didn't think people really cared that much, but apparently so. I do make all these CDs myself. I like the homemade look of them, the DIY style. So I had all these printed out. I actually had my mom last Christmas print out a bunch of these for me, and then I just bought the CDs and the jewel cases and burned them myself and put them all together. So that's Private Either.